Good Shabbos. This week's portion is Parshas Mishpatim, and it's the first portion which deals mostly with laws that were given to the Jewish people. And simply, this is after the reception of the Torah at Mount Sinai, which was in Vayisro, which was the parsha before. And now it starts with the main part of the Torah, which is the giving of the laws. But after the giving of laws, there's a section which seems to be happening before the Torah was given, and that's the way it's understood traditional commentaries. And there, Moshe goes back and forth between God and the people, and he tells the people he's going to bring the Sefer Habris, the book of the covenant, and the people say, Kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh v'nishma. That anything that God has spoken, we will do, and we will hear. That's simply how you translate it. And Rashi, which is one of the more important commentators, accepts a translation of that we will do and obey, or based on the Aramaic translation, we will accept. In other words, it's just simply, the way I understand it, a double language saying we will completely accept everything that God does and we will follow the instructions of God. But many rabbinic commentators understood this as saying something a little different. Na'aseh, we will do, v'nishma, and then we will hear. How is that possible that you will do before you hear? So the Medrash says that there were many people who told the Jewish people, you're silly. You're saying you're going to do before you hear. How do you know what you're going to do, what you're accepting? You're accepting blindly. And the Medrash says, no, that's exactly what the Jewish people should do. And it says that God gave the Jewish people at that time two crowns, one for saying Na'aseh, what we will do, and one for saying Nishma. And the Medrash seems to be implying that blind obedience is the appropriate approach to the laws of the Torah. And although that sounds sort of counterintuitive to the way we think today, the way I would suggest it might be understood is that it's no different than you have a doctor. You have a doctor who tells you, take this medicine, act in a certain way, go on this diet, and it works, or it works for other people. So he's established his credentials. So then you say, whatever you tell us, we will do. We accept it, and tell us, and we'll follow whatever prescription you give us. Because once God has proven himself as this benign master who's able to instruct us correctly and give us the lessons of morality and how society should act, we're more than willing to say that even if we don't know beforehand, whatever we could accept upon ourselves that we're going to do it. No different than a child from parents. The parents have the authority. The child has to do as they're told, even if they even before they know, they have to say, well, we're going to listen to anything you say. And in general, that's the way most people work within society. We follow the rules, even if we don't understand them, and even if we think they're wrong, we assume that either that they are correct because the authorities that gave them have thought about it longer and harder than we have, or we have to follow the rules that are given to us because we live in a society which goes by a certain set of rules, and that set of rules will apply no matter whether we like it or not. And that seems to be the traditional way of understanding it. But there are those that say, there are rabbinic commentators who say, no, what it means is Na'aseh, we will do, and then Nishma, then we will understand. In other words, they're still accepting that we will follow the words of God, we will follow the laws of the Torah, but afterwards, our job is to try to understand as best as possible. And that seems to be something that I think most of us could live with. Again, it's the doctor who tells you take this surgery. So if you take the time and you study and you look into it, you'll understand. You'll do it if he says it's an emergency. If he says you can't necessarily wait until you've got your medical license to make the decision whether you're going to follow his advice or not. And it's the same thing with a parent, and it's the same thing with God. God's giving us a set of rules for society. If we'll wait till everyone becomes a great philosopher and educates themselves and becomes a legislator who delves into all the details, by that time society will fall apart. So we have to accept the rules, again, assuming that we have a benign master, someone who's proven himself. And then what we do is we struggle for the rest of our lives, perhaps, in trying to understand it. And that's generally, I would say, an acceptable approach within Judaism, is that we really feel that there is a reason and that the reason is understandable. The reason is one that we could accept, and we could come to terms with it if we think about it long and hard enough, and therefore we're willing to accept it. The problem does arise when there's a mitzvah in the Torah, there's a commandment, and when we do think about it, we come to an opposite conclusion. And that poses a problem that I don't want to deal with today, but it's one which really rabbinic law has dealt with for centuries. That in many instances, when the Torah's laws and prescriptions and even morality seems to be in conflict with the morality that we have in our own modern society, oftentimes the rabbis try to understand, rabbinic commentators try to understand it in a way which will harmonize the morality which we have accepted in our society, in our culture, and try to harmonize it with that which the Torah says. Other times, sometimes they will try to avoid the problem. uh, just as an example, the idea of slavery, which is actually prominent in this week's portion, is something which is very foreign to our modern ears and very difficult to understand. But yet, it's part and parcel of the Torah. One way of understanding it is that that was appropriate in its time, and the Torah, if anything, was a very liberal approach to slavery. And again, that's left for another discussion. But that might be true, whether it's a couple thousand years ago, even a couple hundred years ago. But in our modern times, we wouldn't like to have slavery at all. So there, you don't have a real problem because you don't have to own a slave. It's only saying if you own a slave, this is how you treat them. So many of the issues could be dealt with by saying it's just not applicable today. There are some cases which would be applicable and would have a conflict, and that poses a different problem. But in general, I think the approach that we have to have is that these laws are understandable, they're comprehensible. With proper education and proper knowledge and proper understanding of history and psychology, you would come to the same determination. Even if you wouldn't have done it yourself, you could understand where it's coming from. And therefore, you accept it coming from the God who is, as we said last week, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. I made a covenant with you. I made a deal with you. I took you out of Egypt. I performed miracles. I'm giving you the Torah, and therefore you should listen. And we assume that it's a God who is kind and generous and thoughtful and represents the correct approach to morality, and therefore we can live with those laws. Good Shabbos.